Hello everyone. I thought that just for fun, I would read to you the entire story of Peter, the story I was reading as part of the Sunday school lesson. You may be interested to know how it ends, or maybe just want to hear the story in its entirety. I did write it for the sake of anybody who wants to listen, so I thought, well, I'll put it out there, and if anybody wants to hear it, here it is. From start to finish, the Tales of Peter. Chapter 1. There once was a boy named Peter. You might have met him. He lived 3 doors down from the corner store, back when you were small. No? You don't remember him? Well, that's okay. His family moved a lot. Anyway, Peter was known as the boy with 1,000 fears. He was afraid of everything. He was afraid of the TV remote, because it might have germs on it. Or the TV remote buttons might break off and fly into his eye. He was afraid of the vacuum because he thought it would damage his hearing, because he thought it might one day catch his shoelace and try and suck him into the vacuum cleaner bag, to be lost forever. He was afraid of dogs because they were faster than he was, and if they wanted, they could chase him down and eat him for breakfast. Even the little ones. Especially the little ones. He once had a dog named Milo, but Milo had been the last animal he had ever trusted. He was afraid of cats because cats were cunning. He was afraid of loud noises and whispers and grass and spiders and jello and hardcover books and bunny rabbits and white paint and toilet paper, and the list went on and on and on. He was known as the boy of 1,000 fears for good reason. But oddly enough, he wasn't always like that. When he was really little, like 3 or 4 years old, he was absolutely fearless. He would jump off his parents' roof during the winter and land in the snow. He would wrestle the family dog Milo, who was like a bazillion times bigger than he was. And his parents would find him asleep with Milo in his kennel hours later. He would get excited when there was a thunderstorm, and he would talk to anyone and everyone he would meet. Nothing scared him. Back then, he was called Peter the Magnificent, after his favorite character in his favorite book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The High King Peter, King of Narnia, brave and bold. But something started to change. One day, the brave boy was different. At first it was little things. He wouldn't talk to complete strangers, and he wouldn't run outside in his underwear during thunderstorms. His parents thought he was growing up and becoming more sensible, but he kept changing. By the time he was 6, he was frightened of birthday cakes, and his parents realized that they had a problem. They took him to therapists and guidance counselors, even to their pastor, but no one could figure out why he had changed so much. His pastor asked him, "Do you not trust that God is with you anymore?" To which Peter said, "That doesn't help when I think he might be mad at me." When they asked him why he thought that, he wouldn't say anything more. After that, everyone was stumped. The years went by, and Peter only grew worse. Soon he never left his room. He did all his studies on the computer. He read, but only softcover books, although he was starting to doubt how much he could truly trust those after a rather painful paper cut. And he looked out his window. He only ever saw his mom and dad, and occasionally his Grandma Smith. Old people scared him, and she was the only one who didn't look too old to him. His mom and dad were at a loss, and often his mom would cry at the supper table before she went to bed. She was so worried about her little boy. One night, a night not so different than 100 other nights, Peter was preparing to go to bed. He had finished saying his prayers. He was uncertain about how God felt about him, but still felt he should pray, when there was a tiny scritch, scritch, scritch sound at his window. His first thought was, "Monkey pirates! I knew it! I knew it!" The sound came again, scritch, 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 at the window. Peter wanted nothing more than to run away screaming, but he really didn't know where to run. Horrified, he sat there, frozen, uncertain what to do. If the monkey pirates wanted in, they were going to find a way. All Peter could do was be ready to face his horrible end at the hands of Tiberius, the captain of the monkey pirates. When he was scared, Peter's imagination tended to run away with him. He sat and he waited, barely able to breathe. The horrible scratching noise continued, and then the window, His only barrier against absolute doom swung open. He came face to face with the horror that would be his end. He came face to face with a hummingbird. He did the only thing he could think of. He fainted. Chapter 2. When Peter woke up, he immediately noticed 3 things. 1. The clock beside his bed said 1 a.m., which meant he'd been out cold for 4.5 hours. He had a horrible headache, and much to his dismay, the hummingbird was still in his room, hovering at the end of his bed. He almost passed out again when he saw it was still there, but he willed himself to get to his feet and try to get rid of the thing. He looked around his room for anything that could help. His eyes fell on a badminton racket. He took a step towards it before a tiny, honeyed voice said, "Please don't pick up your badminton racket. I am not here to hurt you." Who said that? He looked around the room, wondering who else was in there with him. But he was alone with the hummingbird. The voice spoke again. "I'm right here. I have been here since you fainted, waiting for you to wake up." Peter looked in stunned horror at the hummingbird. His knees almost went out from under him again. He caught himself on the edge of the bed. "Please don't faint again. I would rather not have to be here all night, watching you hit the floor over and over again. It is no fun watching you drool on your carpet. And you snore." Peter tried to say something, anything, to the strange creature hovering in front of him. After almost a minute, he finally managed to let out a ragged grunt that sounded more like someone deflating an old basketball. Or something like that. "Okay, that was nice," the hummingbird's sweet tone indicated. He was trying to be polite, but was starting to lose patience. Peter tried again. What are you?" "A hummingbird." "But a talking hummingbird? I've never heard of such a thing." That does not stop me from existing. I am in the service of the one over the seas." "Who?" "The one over the seas." "Never mind. That isn't important right now. What is important is why I'm here." "I assumed you were here to kill me." If a hummingbird could look both shocked and hurt, this one managed it somehow. "How could you think such a thing? That is terrible. And how could I possibly manage that? I am tiny. You could crush me with 2 fingers. Peter shrugged. "I was scared. With your pointy beak and speed, I thought that maybe you could get me before I could get you. I don't know. I know it doesn't make any sense, but that is the way I am. I can find a reason to be scared of everything. And once I have, I can never shake that fear, no matter how hard I try." The hummingbird hovered in silence for a moment. When it spoke next, its words seemed deliberate and somehow very formal. "That is why I am here. I have come to guide you on a quest. I am here to be your guide." "You mean like a spirit animal?" "Me? Your spirit animal?" "As if. No, your spirit animal, if you actually had one, would probably be a lion or something." "A lion? I thought they were brave." "Not the male ones. Bloody cowards they are. Look at them wrong and they run for the females." Oh, Peter looked rather crestfallen. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way. I know you struggle with courage, but what you are now is not what you have to be for the rest of your life. Yes, you are scared of things. Well, you are scared of everything. But that is why I'm here. To take me on a quest." "Well, what is the quest for? What are we searching for?" "Your courage." There was another moment of silence. "Are you ready?" "Now?" Peter couldn't keep the rising panic out of his voice. "Yes, now. No time like the present." "How?" "Just say you are ready. Then step up to the window and we will be off." "That's it?" "That's it." 100 thoughts buzzed through Peter's head, most surrounding him running to his parents' room screaming for help. But one thought, only one, kept surfacing. It was persistent and he couldn't push it away, no matter how hard he tried. He didn't want to be a coward anymore. He wanted to be brave, like he had been once upon a time. He took a deep breath. "I'm ready." He stepped up to the window, took another breath, and pulled back the curtains. Chapter 3. A soft, gentle breeze greeted Peter as the window swung open. The hummingbird flitted out and hung suspended in front of Peter's nose, just out of arm's reach. "What now?" Peter asked. "Jump." "What?" "Jump." Are you insane? The hummingbird giggled. At least, Peter thought it giggled. It was hard to tell with a hummingbird. It sounded like a cell phone put to vibrate while stuffed in the crack of a sofa. You have to jump, but trust me, all will be well. I can't jump. I'll die. I should mention that Peter's room was on the second floor. Although it was unlikely he would have died, a jump from that distance would have hurt. Look at it as your first test. You want to be brave again, don't you? I can't be brave if my neck is broken, he shot back tensely. Trust me. Disclaimer, don't try this at home. In fact, never jump out of your second-story window unless you have a talking hummingbird who is the emissary of the one over the seas. If that ever happens, perhaps you can consider doing this. But otherwise, stick to jumping on your parents' bed. Peter looked down and looked at the little bird floating so effortlessly in front of him. This is insane, he thought to himself. But then this whole night had been something taken from the pages of one of his fantasy books. Why should this moment be any different? He took a deep breath and he jumped, with the final thought of, at least I didn't get mauled by a badger. He waited for the moment when he would hit the ground, but the moment never came. He seemed to fall forever. He opened his eyes. When did he close them, he thought? And instead of seeing his backyard or the house or the neighbor's home, he saw colors. All kinds of colors, sliding and spinning past him. To his side there was color, and below him there was color, and above him, well, there was color. But there was also a tiny house. This is his tiny house, receding into the distance. It was getting smaller by the second, and before he knew it, had totally disappeared. He looked down again. Far below his feet, or so it seemed, something was approaching him. It looked like grass, or at least something green. It got larger and larger. The colors around him spun and slid and changed. It was like he was caught in a giant kaleidoscope. He felt dizzy and sick and so confused he couldn't even remember his own name. And then just like that, it was over. The colors vanished and were replaced with lovely blue sky and the warm smell of the summer. He looked down, and the grass rushed up to meet him. As quickly as it began, his strange jump was over. His feet touched the grass, and he collapsed into the soft turf. That wasn't so bad, came the high-pitched buzzing of the hummingbird. Peter started to laugh. Or was he crying? He couldn't tell. He stood up to look the little bird in the eye. That wasn't bad? Wasn't bad? That was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. Ever. What were all those colors? Oh, that was the bridge. The bridge between worlds. Between worlds? You mean I'm in another world? Yes, the hummingbird seemed very pleased with itself. What world am I in? I think it is called Earth. That is where I came from. Oh, that's right. Sorry, let me think. Thomas. Thomas? The world is named Thomas? Yes. What kind of world is named Thomas? Fine, I don't know what this world is called. I actually don't think it has a name. All I know is that this is where your quest begins, and we are going there. The hummingbird motioned with its beak to some low-lying hills in the distance. Why, what's there? A man by the name of Noah. Noah, as in the guy who built the ark? Same guy. He needs your help. With what? He will tell you when you find him. Peter almost said something more, but decided not to. Okay. What about shoes? I don't want to step on something sharp or poisonous. I have no shoes to give you, but this place is perfectly safe. The grass is softer than the softest pillow. You will be fine. All right, Peter said somewhat petulantly. Are you ready? One moment. Peter turned his head and proceeded to vomit in the grass. His head had not stopped spinning after the fall from his world, and his stomach had decided in that moment to empty itself. After a few noisy minutes, he scrubbed his mouth with the back of his hand, stood up straight, and said to his guide, I'm ready. The hummingbird seemed to nod. That was gross. Okay, follow me. They set off together across the plain of grass stretching out in front of them. Chapter 4. After an hour of walking, 3 things became apparent to Peter. 1. He was hungry, thirsty, and tired. 2. The hummingbird had been completely right about the grass. It was very soft. but it had not mentioned the rocks and holes and other assorted obstacles that lay hidden in the grass. After numerous trips, stumbles, and stubbed toes, his feet were sore and scratched, and he had a noticeable limp. 3. The hills did not look any closer. When they had walked another 5 minutes, Peter stopped. "Why have you stopped?" asked the hummingbird. "I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, and my feet hurt." "We will soon be there." "We will? How? Those hills don't look any closer than they did an hour ago when we started." "They aren't." "What? How can they not be any closer?" "Those are the hills of tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. Have you never noticed that it is always today?" Peter didn't know what to say to that. After a moment, Peter finally asked, "Then why are we walking?" "You always have to walk towards tomorrow, otherwise you're stuck in the past. Otherwise it can never truly be today." "What?" "Peter, when was the last time you walked through your day, excited about what you might experience, excited about the moment, and the one after that, and the one after that?" Peter hesitated. "It's been a long time. Everything is always so scary. It would be easier if I could go back to when I was younger. Nothing was quite so scary back then." "But you can't go back in time. If you try, you go nowhere. You grow up, things change around you. But you don't change, and you don't go forward. The world leaves you behind. Does that remind you of something?" Peter looked around. They were standing there in an open field with his sore, scratched-up feet, his parched throat, his tummy which was screaming at him for food, and his wobbly, tired legs. And one other thing which he had not noticed because he was so used to it always being with him. His fear. He was scared. "It reminds me of right now. I have a feeling that we could walk forever and the hills would not come any closer. And I am afraid. I am afraid of what is in the grass. I am afraid I will pass out from hunger, thirst, or exhaustion and be left behind. I am afraid that I will never get home." His voice caught at that last admission, and a tear ran down his cheek. "Sometimes fear is necessary. It can help us be cautious and careful in dangerous situations. But it isn't helpful if that is all we can feel and we try and hide, or try and go backwards to somewhere we believe we were never scared. Then life becomes like this plane. It goes on and goes nowhere. We are lost in all of this, just as we are lost in our fear. We can't go back, but we can't let ourselves go forward." Peter nodded. "So what do I have to do?" "Trust me. I will never guide you wrong. You just have to trust me above your own fears. Only then can we reach the hills. Only when there is something stronger than your fear can you let yourself move forward. Like I did when I jumped from my window. Exactly." This seemed to Peter to be a reasonable enough request. He had, after all, trusted the little bird enough to jump from his window, but he was still filled with anxiety. "Okay, lead the way." Peter took a deep breath and then followed the hummingbird. As he did, he tried to block his fears and his doubts and just focused on the little ball of flapping wings in front of him. Sometimes it worked. When it did, when he really focused on the bird, then in 2 steps, the hills would almost seem to jump towards them. But other times, when he struggled to stay focused and the fear returned, the hills didn't move an inch closer. He struggled along this way for almost 2 hours, but eventually they made it. The hummingbird turned towards him. "I am so proud of you. That wasn't easy, I know, but you did it, and now the quest can begin." Peter opened his mouth to say something about how the bridge between worlds and the unending plains of doubt surely had to be considered part of the quest, when out from the hill strode the oldest man Peter had ever seen. He was dressed in a green robe, had a long white beard, and he was at least 100 years old, if he was a day. He walked right up to Peter, grabbed his hand, and gave him a hearty handshake. "Hi, Peter. My name is Noah." Chapter 5. "Hi." It was all that Peter could think to say. Noah stared at him as if he expected Peter to say something more. He even nodded gently to Peter as if to encourage him to keep speaking. Peter found himself getting more and more flustered. He didn't know what to say. "Not very bright, is he?" Noah said, turning to the hummingbird. "He is bright enough, just a bit out of his depth right now." "Aren't we all, when we are set on a pathway?" The hummingbird quickly interrupted him by loudly clearing its throat. At least that is what Peter thought it was doing. The sound was like that of a pellet from a pellet gun, glancing off of metal. Noah looked with confusion at the hummingbird and then shook his head. Well, I suppose you are here to start your quest. Yes, Peter wanted to say more, but the sight of this old man had seemingly evaporated all excess of thought right out of his head. Yes, well, let's begin then. What I need help with is finding a lost pair of unicorns. You see, after I let all those creatures off the ark, I took account of every creature who entered into the New World, and I can say with absolute certainty that Bertha and Greg were there. Who are Bertha and Greg? Noah looked puzzled. They're the unicorns. Keep up, boy. There was obvious impatience in his voice. Sorry, who had ever heard of unicorns named Bertha and Greg? In fact, who could believe unicorns were even real? Anyway, after that day I never saw them again. But then, I never saw a lot of those creatures again. After you spent all that time cooped up in an overly crowded ark, you need your space. It was a miracle. I still wanted to hang out with my own family after that. He guffawed loudly. Peter just stared. Noah frowned. That was funny, boy. Peter shook his head. Well, what do you know of humor? Anyway, after a couple of 100 years, I had not heard word one from either Bertha or Greg. I started getting worried. I looked a long, long time for them, but never found them. Now I think I have. That is where you come in. Peter nodded. Okay, how can I help? Well, I finally tracked them down to this world. I don't know why they left ours. I will have to ask them when I see them next, I guess. They aren't far from here. In fact, they are just at the place where the river runs through the hills. There is a cave, deep inside one of the hills, where I think they are taking refuge. But the entrance is too small for me. I think you might just be able to slide in. What do you say? I guess I could do that. But how do they get in if the entrance was so small? And what do I do when I meet them? Noah grinned. Well, unicorns are magic, you see, or at least you could call it magic. They were always special. Some say they were the steeds of angels. Others think they were angels. Who knows? They always operated under their own rules, did things that other creatures couldn't, and between you and I, they were never happy in our world. Too many restrictions and no one else to talk to. Half the time I had no idea what they were talking about. They can talk? Of course they can talk, boy. Try and keep up. What I need you to do is slide down into the cave and deliver this message. Tell them they can go home. The one over the seas is calling them home. Do you think you can remember that? Peter nodded. Yeah, that isn't too hard. Good. Well, let's go. No telling how long they'll stay here, and I don't want to spend hundreds of years trying to find them again. With that, he started out. Peter followed. He'd taken a few steps when he realized the hummingbird wasn't with them. Peter turned. It was still hovering a few feet away, having made no move to join them. Aren't you coming? Peter asked. No. Noah will guide you well enough. I will wait here. You can tell me everything when you get back. Okay, Peter said hesitantly. He had only known the little bird a very short time, but realized he had come to rely on his little guide. It had never steered him wrong, it had always encouraged him, and it wasn't half so grumpy as Noah. Plus, that tiny little creature could well be his only way home. As if he could read Peter's thoughts, the hummingbird said, I won't go anywhere. You had better hurry. Noah won't wait forever. Okay, Peter said again. He turned back to Noah, who was stamping his feet impatiently. They set off at a brisk trot, keeping to the low points between the hills. Peter found that he was getting hopelessly lost in all the twists and turns, and wondered if he could find his way back should he get separated from Noah. He quickened his steps, sticking as close as he could to the old man, without stepping on the fringe of his robe. The thought of getting lost did not sit well with him. Before half an hour had passed, Peter could hear the sounds of water running. After 2 more twists in and around the hills, the river was suddenly before them, an azure snake of water, flowing lazily through the hills. This is the River Pishon. It was one of the rivers that flowed from Eden, but before you get the idea of following it back there, know that it crosses places that no mortal person could ever survive. You would be forced to turn around long before you got to the garden. Peter couldn't help but stare. A river of legend, flowing just a few feet away. He felt he should bow or something to the river. If you want, you can take a drink. It's a hot day and the water tastes a bit like Mountain Dew. Peter couldn't help himself. He was incredibly hungry, thirsty, and tired. Not now that he thought about it. He stooped down, put his hand in the water, and brought it to his lips. It tasted sweet and refreshing, a little like his grandmother's mint iced tea, which he loved so much. He said this to Noah as he slurped up as much as he could drink. His thirst lessened, as did his hunger. He even felt less tired. As he got back to his feet and rejoined Noah, he could hear the old man muttering, I always thought it tasted like Mountain Dew. I like Mountain Dew. Mint iced tea. Bah. When he noticed Peter, he abruptly stopped muttering and instead pointed to the hill in front of him. Peter followed his outstretched finger. There, in the face of the hill, was an entrance. That's the cave. It looks wide enough, but it gets small really fast. That is where I have to go? Yup. Do you remember the message? Peter repeated it to Noah. Good. Well, no sense waiting. Sooner you go, sooner you get back. Chapter 6. Peter's first step into the cave brought with it the smell of soil and mildew. Not wholly unpleasant smells, but ones that reminded Peter of gardens, which frightened him because of the crawling ants and wriggling worms and the nasty-eyed, not-to-be-trusted spiders. That sent a shiver down Peter's spine. He took a deep breath and took a few more steps into the mouth of the cave. We need to take a moment to put something in perspective. Remember when I said that Peter was afraid of everything? Everything? Well, it should be noted that the boy who was afraid of everything has jumped out a window, traversed the bridge between worlds, trusted a talking hummingbird to lead him across seemingly endless grassy plains, met Noah without fainting, followed said Noah, and is now walking into a cave to hunt unicorn. Needless to say, Peter has made some huge strides, and this is only chapter 6. But we had best not to tell him any of this. He still thinks he's a coward. He doesn't realize quite yet how brave he truly is. I'm afraid if we tell him, he might remember that he is supposed to be scared and then be begged to be taken back home. Can you promise not to tell him? Good. Instead, let's just cheer him on. The further Peter went into the cave, the darker it became. Soon there was very little light. Peter was trembling from fright. Of all the things he was most scared of, the dark was the worst. Who knew what might be lurking in the darkness? He almost turned back a number of times, but instead he thought of Noah waiting in hope outside the cave, and he thought of the hummingbird so strangely proud of everything he managed to accomplish. Those thoughts gave him strength and he kept going. Before too long he discovered what it was that Noah was talking about. When he first started off, he couldn't even touch the edges of the cave, even when he stretched out his arms on both sides. Now the walls had closed in just to a few feet from his shoulders. The ceiling, high above him when he had started, was beginning to scrape his head. He was forced to bend low, then he had to turn sideways, and then he was trying to slide sideways on his knees, which really didn't work, and then he was stuck. He couldn't for the life of him figure out how he had gotten stuck, but stuck he was, and he was really stuck. He couldn't move forward, and he couldn't seem to free himself enough to go backward. When he realized that, he started to panic. There he was, alone in the pitch-black darkness, and stuck. He thought of crying for help, but realized that Noah would not be able to reach him anyway, and the hummingbird was too small to do anything. So instead he started to cry, there in the darkness. He was sure he was going to die down here, and he missed his mom. Remember when I said we need to encourage Peter? Well, this might be a good time to do that. He needs all the help he can get. Peter wasn't sure how long he was stuck down there. It might have been 5 hours. It might have been 5 days. It might have been 5 minutes. But at some point he realized that the darkness was not completely dark to him. There was a soft silver glow coming from deeper in the cave, and it was getting stronger. Before long, the whole cavern was lit up by silver light, but Peter couldn't see where it was coming from. As Peter was trying to determine who or what was bearing the light, a soft voice spoke, "Who are you?" Peter tried desperately to peer into the darkness beyond the light, but he couldn't see anything. "Who said that? Please, is someone there? I'm stuck. Could you help me?" Peter wiggled to show just how stuck he was. "Who are you? Why are you here?" the voice asked again. My name is Peter. I have come looking for 2 unicorns by the name of Bertha and Greg. Why do you seek them? I have a message from Noah. He wants me to tell them that they can go home. The one over the seas is calling them home. That is what Noah said. Nothing else. Nothing about the need to return with him to Earth or any of the other worlds. No, nothing like that. Just that they can go home. There was a momentary silence. When the voice spoke again, the light intensified. Peter was forced to try and protect his eyes. Peter. The light shone even brighter. Even with his eyes closed, the light burned and he whimpered in pain. Peter, the voice said again. Then without another word, the light subdued, and Peter was able to open his eyes. Follow me, the voice said, and started to move off. But I can't. I'm stuck. Peter suddenly found he could move his arms again. The passage seemed to be opening up, or was he shrinking? Either way, he was free. Peter sobbed in relief. The light was moving farther and farther away. Peter ran to catch up. He had a million questions, but thought it better to wait. Wait for what, he thought to himself. That wasn't abundantly clear, but he still felt he should wait, and so walked on in silence. Down, down, down they went, as if they were going down to the very depths of the world. Peter walked in silence, so grateful that he was free that he didn't mind the walk at all. Finally the light stopped. The voice, soft and deliberate, spoke again. Peter, we are here, but you must promise 2 things before we go. Okay, said Peter. First, you must always speak the truth, no matter the question. Do you agree? Yes. Second, you can tell no one what you see here, unless those hidden choose to reveal themselves. Your promise is your covenant. Do you promise? Yes, I promise to speak only the truth and to reveal nothing of what I see here. Good. Then welcome. The black of the cave split wide open as what looked like a door opened in front of Peter. The light that poured out was warm and golden, not like the cool light that had led Peter through the cave. Peter swallowed, nervous to step through, but he also didn't want to stay in the darkness for even a second longer. He stepped in. What greeted his eyes as he moved through the door of light was beyond anything he could ever have imagined. Chapter 7. I know what I'm about to say is going to annoy many of you, but I can't tell you what Peter saw in that cave. But why, you might ask? Simple, Peter never told me. You remember that silver light made him promise that he would tell no one what he saw? Well, he kept that promise. I have to hand it to him. It could not have been easy to keep that to himself. Actually, there may have been one person that Peter told, the hummingbird, but I don't know that for sure. The next thing I know was that Peter, sometime later, exited the cave with two beautiful unicorns beside him. You guessed it, Bertha and Greg. Noah was nearly bouncing with excitement when he saw them emerge. Where have you been, boy? You've been gone for days. But it wasn't said meanly. Noah was smiling from ear to ear as he spoke to Peter. Peter didn't answer. Instead, Greg stepped forward. I am sorry to have made you wait, Peter. Didn't wait, Noah. I don't mean just the last couple of days. I mean since the flood. We should have told you where we were and what we had intended to do. Noah nodded, but when Greg didn't say anything else, he shrugged awkwardly and gently patted Greg on the shoulder. Water under the bridge now. I'm just glad you are back. Can I assume that means you are going to take up the offer of the Oots? Peter looked at Noah in confusion. The one over the seas, Noah explained. I know it's not the most flattering acronym, but it's better than Toots. We have, Bertha replied. Our business in this and any other world is now at an end. Again, there was nothing more forthcoming. If Noah was getting frustrated with the rather vague answers, he did a good job masking it. Okay, well, the Paraclete is waiting for us. Best not to keep it waiting any longer. Peter started off, with Greg following, Bertha and Peter bringing up the rear. Peter supporting himself on Bertha as they walked. It wasn't because of weakness that he needed the support. Rather, it was due to the powerful sadness that seemed ready to swallow him up. I am sorry, child. Perhaps you were not ready for what we showed you." Peter shook his head. "I needed to see it, I just never realized." Tears welled up and he was forced to stop talking. They walked on in silence. After what seemed like hours, but in reality was less than half an hour, they arrived back at where the hummingbird had left them. It was still there, hovering quietly. Peter could not say whether he was grateful or not to see the little bird again. It was his guide and the only way home, yet it had been the one to set his feet on this path of fear and sadness. He wished he had never jumped out his window. He clung even tighter to Bertha. "Your quest was successful, I see," it chirped. "Yes, Peter did his job admirably, and now finally I can rest." Noah patted Greg, who stood next to him. "Are you ready?" the hummingbird asked the pair of unicorns. After a moment of silence, Bertha inclined her head in affirmation. "Are you ready?" The hummingbird was addressing Noah. "Ready and willing. I can't wait to see my family again." "Very well. Then this is goodbye, at least for now. I will see you on the other side of the sea one day." "But I thought we had to wait for something called a paraclete," Peter asked. Noah looked at Peter in astonishment. "Who, my boy, do you think you have been talking to just now?" He shook his head. "You?" asked the hummingbird. "You're the paraclete?" "Yes," the hummingbird said simply. Peter didn't even know what a paraclete was, although the name sounded familiar. Before he could say any more, the hummingbird flittered off a few paces to the west. It turned to face the sinking sun. There was absolute silence. Not even a breath of wind could be heard, nor a single chirp of a bird, only silence. The hills and sky to the west seemed momentarily out of focus. When everything cleared again, there was a door hanging a foot or so off the ground. Through that door there was a land more green and brilliant than anything Peter had ever seen before. Noah whooped loudly and raced to the door, stopping only long enough to give Peter a hug. "Nema, here I come!" Peter saw him race to the door, turn right, and then disappear from view. Greg and Bertha both turned to Peter before they left. "Gentle Peter, thank you for coming to find us. It was a privilege to know you, and I hope the days ahead will be good ones." Greg nodded his proud head and stepped back, allowing Bertha to take his place. "Dear boy, I am sorry we did not have more time together. Remember everything you were shown. Remember that you are a dear and gentle boy. Don't let your fear tell you otherwise. You are loved." She gently touched the top of his head like she was kissing him. Peter was openly weeping as he grabbed her neck and kissed her goodbye. After a few moments, he let go of her and she turned away. Without a backwards glance, Bertha and Greg walked through the portal. For just an instant, they were framed by that portal in the air. Then the portal snapped out of existence and they were gone. It was just Peter again, along with the hummingbird, the paraclete. Silence hung between them until the hummingbird finally spoke. "So, I imagine you have a few questions." Chapter 8. Peter just stared at the little bird. He didn't know what to say. What he had been shown in the caves was difficult to put into words. "Why did you bring me here?" "To help you, of course." "Help me? How? I have never been more afraid than I have been over the last however long I've been gone. And why did I have to find the unicorns? You're much smaller than I am. Why didn't you go talk to them?" "It was not my quest. It was meant for you, to help you. But how has it helped? Now I feel exhausted and sad." The hummingbird was silent for a moment. "I am not the right one to answer these questions. I am a guide. I can support you. I can even help you find the answers within yourself. But I cannot answer those questions for you. You need to find another to do that." "Great, another quest. Who am I going to look for this time? Moses, Elijah, Jesus? Will it look like a toadstool or a giant flying scorpion?" Peter realized he was quite angry with the hummingbird. He wasn't really sure if that anger had anything to do with the little creature or not. "You need to find 3 things, a coin, a sheep, and a young man. Then you need to bring all 3 to the shepherd." Peter glared at the hummingbird. "And where, pray tell, will I find these things? We are in the middle of nowhere." A thought crossed Peter's mind. He broke into a sweat. "We don't have to take the bridge across the worlds to somewhere else, do we?" The hummingbird seemed to shake its head. If it can be said a hummingbird can do such a thing. "How else will you get home?" Yes, we do have to take the bridge again, but the trip will be shorter. Peter grunted. Oh goody, at least I haven't eaten for a while. The unicorns gave me water to drink that made me feel full as if I'd eaten a steak meal or something. I think it might be wearing off, but I will wait until after the fun ride of death before I think of eating again. Good idea, said the hummingbird. Last time was really gross. They set off, but rather than traveling across the plains, they journeyed through the hills. For hours they walked. Peter almost regretted saying that he would eat after they arrived on the new world, but the idea of eating evaporated when he remembered what awaited him. He knew they must be getting close when instead of walking around a hill, they climbed to the very top. Of course, it had to be the tallest hill of the bunch. Panting and sweating, Peter stumbled up to the hummingbird, trying to catch his breath. Are you ready? It said after a few moments. Sure, Peter said. Let's get this over with. Like the first time, Peter was swallowed up by a technicolor swirl of color. But unlike last time, where it felt as if he was falling, he felt like he was on a fast elevator. Either that or being sucked up a vacuum cleaner, Peter thought. He was just growing accustomed to the feeling when suddenly it was over. The lights were gone, and Peter found himself standing on a crowded, busy street in what looked like some ancient Middle Eastern town. Where are we? He asked. Jerusalem, 2,000 years or so before you were born. Peter's eyes widened. The dust and the heat were almost suffocating. Of course, it was at that moment his stomach chose to remind him that he had just traveled via the Wold Bridge. He erupted in a series of noisy, dry heaves that had everyone on the street avoiding him as if he had had the plague. When he was finished, he looked over at the hummingbird. Gross, was all that it said. Peter rolled his eyes. Why am I here? After everything he had experienced, being 2,000 years in the past didn't seem that hard to contemplate. For the first item on your list, the coin, yes. Where do I find it? There, the hummingbird motioned with its beak. An old woman, looking frantic, had stepped out of a door a few feet from where they were standing. She peered hastily one way and then the next, and then went back inside. You have to help her find the coin. Peter shook his head. Of course, he had to help an ancient Israelite woman find her coin. That made perfect sense. Peter stalked to the door of the house and knocked a little harder than perhaps he had meant to. The old woman appeared. Yes, what do you want? I'm here to help you find your coin. How did you know I was missing my coin? She eyed his strange clothes suspiciously. I was told about it by a friend. Who? John? Oh, John! Good boy, young John. Well then, come in. There wasn't much inn to go into. Her house was tiny, dusty, and hot. I've been looking everywhere for 2 days, but my eyesight is terrible. I may have found it 4 times already and just not realized it. Peter nodded. He went to work, searching through the tiny hovel. After about 15 minutes, he found it in the corner, underneath a basket. When he presented it to the lady, she was ecstatic. Thank you. I thought I was losing my mind. Here, and she pressed the coin into his hand. But I thought you needed it. I hate losing things. I thought I was going crazy. But I don't really need it. I just wanted to make sure no one had taken it or I had lost it. You keep it, boy, and thank you for helping me. Thanks, Peter said. The old woman smiled and then had him sit down for a glass of warm water, a dried husk of stale bread, and a fig, which Peter enjoyed a great deal. Some time later, Peter emerged to find the hummingbird waiting outside the old woman's door. One down, it said. Snow flattened like a paper box, run over by a Pepsi truck. For just a moment, the world was without shape or dimension, and then everything sprang back into shape with an almost audible snap. It was everything Peter could do not to fall on his face. His whole body trembled. He was soaked in sweat, as if he had just run a marathon. What was that? He chattered through his teeth. A hop. We bounced to a different part of the world we were already in. Neat, huh? Peter stood there, staring at a little bird who considered a mode of transportation which had made him feel as if he had been turned inside out neat. No, he whispered. Not neat. Each to his own, I guess. It took Peter another 15 minutes to settle down and stop shaking. Where is the sheep I need to find?" "In the grove of trees not far from here. You can see it to the north." Peter took that moment to look around at the setting they now found themselves in. Low hills with occasional tufts of grass dominated the landscape. It was harsh terrain and seemed almost desert-like. He could hear sheep somewhere to the south of him. They seemed upset. When he asked about that, the little bird told him that yes, the sheep were upset. One of the flock was lost. But worse than that, their shepherd had gone out looking for the lost one, and now they were scared. They were used to having him around, and now he wasn't there to protect them. Why would the shepherd leave all of his sheep just to find one? That seems a little risky. Well, perhaps you should ask him when you see him. Peter shrugged. He set off towards the trees. I should note that it is interesting, as he did so, that he never stopped to think of the dangers that might be waiting for him. A lion could have been lurking in those trees, or some other predator. There may have been bandits, but none of that crossed his mind. He was tired, he missed his family, and he wanted this quest to be over. On top of all of that, what the unicorns had shown him still weighed upon him. He needed to talk to his parents. Soon enough, he found himself in the stand of trees. It was dark, and he couldn't see much, so instead he relied on his hearing. Unless the sheep was dead, it should be making enough noise for him to locate. Sure enough, he heard a soft bleating coming from his right. He started towards the noise, but abruptly stopped. There was another noise coming from that direction. It was the sound of something large moving through the trees, and it seemed to be heading for the sheep. He could have left. He had no idea what that other noise was, and it could have been dangerous, but he didn't. Instead, he ran towards the sound of the sheep, careless of the noise he was making. He simply wanted to reach the animal before the other creature did, whatever it might be. Branches whipped him in the face. He stumbled more than once on a hidden root, but he kept upright and he kept running. He stumbled on the sheep so suddenly that he almost ran right by it. But there it was, entwined in brambles and bleeding in fear, now that something it didn't know had discovered it. "Shh, quiet. I will get you free, but you have to stay quiet." The sheep did what sheep always do. It didn't listen and bleated louder. Peter worked quickly, loosening and untying the brambles where he could, snapping others where he couldn't. The sheep struggled as well, once it realized that Peter wasn't there to hurt it. Soon enough, it was free. "Go!" Peter cried. "Go!" But it was immediately apparent that it had hurt its back leg. It limped a couple of steps and flopped down despondently. Peter could hear whatever was in the trees growing near. It would be on them any minute now. Bleeding, bruised, and exhausted, Peter did the only thing he could think of. He gathered the sheep into his arms and he ran. He could never say how he managed that. It was like a combination of the sheep cooperating, his own adrenaline coursing through his veins, and the fact that the sheep itself didn't seem to be fully grown. Whatever the reason, Peter managed to break free of the trees ahead of the predator. But it was close behind them, and within a few steps of the grove, Peter knew it was free of the trees and hot on their heels. It was, in fact, a lion, and a rather angry lion at that. It was enraged that somehow its easy meal had escaped it. Peter glanced over his shoulder. It nearly had them. Peter tried to run faster, but only managed to stumble and go down. The lion would be on them any moment. This was the way his life was going to end. He closed his eyes and braced for the worst. But instead of claws, he was greeted with a horrible, high-pitched yowl, and then another, and then he heard the sound of the lion running off. He opened his eyes. The lion was nearly 100 yards away, running hard the other direction. Peter tried to still his nerves. The sheep lay in his arms, trembling. They stayed like that until a hand reached out and a voice said, "Do you need help?" Peter looked up. A man, a shepherd, stood above him with his hand outstretched. In his other hand dangled the sling he had used to drive the lion away. Gratefully, Peter took his hand and was pulled to his feet. The sheep, obviously recognizing its shepherd, bleated gratefully. The shepherd stooped down and lifted it up. "Thank you," he said. Peter was immediately put to ease by this man. He couldn't have been more than 30, yet he seemed older, calmer, wiser, although Peter couldn't say how he knew that. Peter nodded. "I didn't do much." You saved her. I would not have made it in time. Because of you and your courage, my beloved one is safe. Thank you." Peter nodded again. "Here," the man handed him a water flask. Peter accepted it wordlessly and drank with a greedy thirst. The water seemed to strengthen him. Exhaustion, fear, even his aches and pains simply vanished. He handed the water back to the man, but the man shook his head. "Oh, I have another. You keep it. You may need it." "Thanks," Peter said. "Thank you," the shepherd smiled. "I am grateful. I am afraid I must leave you now, though. I left the other sheep unattended, and I should really get back to them." "You're a good man, Peter. Never forget that. I'll see you soon." With that, he turned and started back to his flock. Peter wanted to ask him how he knew his name, and how he knew that they would see each other again, but the questions seemed unimportant. He watched the shepherd walk away, and when he disappeared over the top of a hill, Peter turned and walked back to the hummingbird. "Success?" it asked. "Yes, I found the sheep, and it's safe." "Good. Now we go find the young man." Chapter 10. There was the shift that Peter now associated with the hop, and they stood on a road, outside a small town. Peter was shaking as he stared off in the distance. His legs were like jello and he had a headache. So much had happened in the last couple of hours. Too much. A tear traced down his cheek. Was this still all a dream? And if it was, could it be more rightly called a nightmare? The hummingbird must have sensed his disquiet. It gently touched Peter's elbow. When Peter looked down, tears... Okay. What is it doing? Okay. Alright, I'll try that again. Have to learn how to cut that one out. Chapter 10. There was a shift that Peter now associated with the hop, and they stood on a road outside a small town. Peter was shaking as he stared off in the distance. His legs were like jello and he had a headache. So much had happened in the last couple of hours. Too much. A tear traced down his cheek. Was this all a dream? And if it was, could it be more rightly called a nightmare? The hummingbird must have sensed his disquiet. It gently touched Peter's elbow. When Peter looked down, tears still streaming down his face, the hummingbird floated up. "We are soon finished. I am sorry that I made you go through all of this. I hope in the end it was worth it." Peter nodded, scrubbing away those tears with the back of his hand. He drew a deep, steadying breath, nodded again, and started walking towards town. Once there, he stopped again. "What am I looking for?" he asked. "A young man, likely down on his luck, perhaps looking a bit disheveled." As the hummingbird finished speaking, a young man, filthy and with a look as if he was being hunted, came tearing around one of the houses, 2 loaves of bread in his arm. He ran straight past Peter and bolted out of town. "I think that might be him," the hummingbird quipped. Peter was about to say something when 3 large men, weapons in hand, came barreling around the same house. They screeched to a halt in front of Peter, looking around frantically. "Did you see a young man run by with bread in his hands?" panted one man, a middle-aged fellow who was as round as he was tall. Peter only hesitated a moment. No one came this way." The man glowered at him. They seemed uncertain where to go, until finally deciding to head back into town. Peter looked at the bird. "If he is the one we need to help, I would rather he wasn't dead." "I didn't say anything," the little bird replied. They left the town, going the direction of the young man. It wasn't, in the end, very hard to find him. About a mile out of town, they came upon a tree on the side of the road, and from the tree they heard what sounded like a pig rooting through its feet, snuffling and grunting as it ate. When Peter looked up into the branches of the tree, there was the young man scarfing down his food. He noticed Peter looking at him and gave a rueful grin. He swallowed and then proceeded to slide back down the tree. "Are they following me?" he asked. "No," Peter replied. "They ran back to town." "Oh, thank you." The young man grabbed his hand and shook it vigorously. "Why did you steal the bread?" The man looked awkwardly down at his feet. At first, Peter didn't think he was going to answer the question, but then he looked up, tears in his eyes. "Months ago I was still living with my father. My dad was the best, but I was getting a little bored. I wanted to see the world, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a farmer like Dad. My older brother was perfectly content to stay on the farm and work with our dad. I wanted to see the world, so stupidly, I asked my dad for my share of the inheritance. Surprisingly, he gave it to me. I could see that it hurt him to see me go, but he didn't want to stand in my way. And so I went. And things were good at first. Really good. Food, wine, fun, adventure. I had it all. But then one day, much to my shock, I found I didn't have any money left. All the friends I had made magically disappeared, and I was left completely alone. I was forced to beg to survive, and it was terrible. I've been starving, dirty, alone, and scared for weeks. But I was too humiliated to go back to my dad's. But things kept getting worse. I realized that if I didn't go back, I was going to die. So that is where I'm going. I don't think my dad will be too happy to see me, but maybe he can give me a job so I have somewhere to go. The young man shrugged sheepishly, his face wet with tears. Peter was silent for a moment before asking, "Maybe I could travel with you for a little bit." The young man nodded. "Sure, my dad's farm is about half a day from here. You could meet him if you wanted. He might like to meet the boy who saved his son's life. That is, if he wants to see me." "I would love to meet your dad," Peter said quickly, hoping to head off another bout of tears. They set off, chatting as they went. The young man was very friendly and shared many stories of his adventures over the past couple of months. Some were amusing, others were shocking, but they were fun to listen to regardless. They stopped a couple of times to rest, and Peter shared water from his water bottle. They had no food to share, so by the time the young man's home appeared in the distance, they were both famished. It was obvious that the young man was very nervous about returning home. He was visibly shaking as they walked the last mile. They stopped at the gate to his dad's property. The young man started to shake his head. No, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have come back here. My dad must hate me. He will chase me off his property, and then I really won't have anywhere to go. Let's go, please. I can't bear to be here." Peter tried to say something, anything, to convince the young man not to leave. But just as he opened his mouth, the gate swung open. An older man stepped forward and with a cry of great joy rushed forward and embraced the young man. Somehow the father must have received word that his father was returning home. Somehow the father must have received word that his son was returning home. Now they were locked in a fierce embrace, weeping and laughing and crying aloud to God, giving thanks. When they were finally able to calm themselves, the young man turned to Peter and introduced him to his father, explaining to his dad how Peter had helped him. The father clapped Peter painfully on the back. "Thank you, lad, for helping out my boy. You're most welcome to stay and join the festivities. For he who was lost has been found, and my heart is full once more." With that, he threw his arm around his son and guided him back to the house. Peter followed. The party that ensued was unlike anything Peter had ever seen before. Food and singing and laughter and tears and then more laughter. Even the hummingbird dipped its bill in a glass of wine, after which it seemed to fly a bit crooked. The only one who didn't seem to enjoy the party was a young man who sat by himself, and whom Peter assumed was likely the older brother. The father at one point left the party to go talk to the older son. He returned to the party with his older son in tow. Sticky page. Eventually, the pace of the last few days, a full belly and a comfortable chair led Peter to drift off, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and fun. When he woke up, it was morning and the sun was already warm. He had slept the night on a chair and his back and neck were rather sore. He got up to stretch and noticed that there was one other person awake. Oddly enough, it was the shepherd from a few days prior, the one who had lost his sheep. The man nodded and walked over to Peter. "Well met, friend Peter. How have you been?" Peter shrugged. "Fine, I guess." "Glad to hear it. I imagine you are excited to be done your quest. And I also imagine you have a few questions for me." Peter was confused. Who was this man? And then he remembered what the hummingbird had told him. "You're the shepherd I needed to find." Peter patted his pockets. The coin from the old woman had settled deep into his right pocket, and it took him a moment to find it. He handed it to the shepherd, who took it from him. "Here's the coin. I guess I helped you find the sheep already, and the young man is back home. Can I ask a few questions now?" The shepherd smiled. "By all means, but first, let me ask you a question. What have you learned on this quest?" Chapter 11. What have I learned? I don't really know. You must have learned something. Peter thought of the strange few days he had spent on this quest. He thought of everything he had experienced. I guess I learned to trust someone is not too scary, especially someone that I know is not trying to hurt me. I learned to trust is often the only way we can truly go forward in our life. He looked towards the sleepy hummingbird where it slept in peaceful bliss in an empty wine glass. I learned that even in dark, scary places, there's always a way out. Whether through someone's help or by staying calm and thinking clearly, he thought of being stuck in the cave on his way to see the unicorns. I learned that even the scariest moments pass. Those moments never last forever. He thought of the trips along the bridge between worlds and about the hops in this world. What about the coin and the sheep and the sun? I guess I learned that when you lose something, no matter how hopeless you think it might be, you keep looking for it. You keep searching for it. That is what true love is. And when you find it, you celebrate like the old lady did and the father did. Even you seemed happy when I gave you back your sheep. I was. So were the rest of its family. But I don't know how those lessons connect. It was like I was on two different quests. One about being afraid and one about what it means to love someone. What did the unicorns show you? Peter hung his head. What they had shown him still broke his heart. They showed me my parents, crying. They showed me my other relatives, broken-hearted, that I didn't want to see them again. And they showed me the moment it all started to change. The day I lost Milo, your dog, my best friend. I was out playing with him, and I was being stupid like I always was when I was little. My mom was with me, and she kept telling me to be careful, but I never listened. I remember kicking a soccer ball I was playing with, and it landed on the road in front of our house. Without even stopping, I ran to go and get it. My mom screamed. There was a car coming. I didn't even see it. It would have hit me, except Milo ran after me. He always protected me. And I can't say this for sure, but I think Milo stopped between me and the car so that the car would hit him instead of me. Even if that isn't true, that is what happened. The car tried to stop in time, but couldn't, and they hit Milo, stopping just a couple of feet away from me. All I remember is crying out for Milo as my mother picked me up. I remember seeing him on the road, and then I didn't see him again. My mom never told me what happened, but I knew he was gone, and it was my fault. Peter was sobbing. It was my fault, and I knew it. Everything changed at that point. I started to become more cautious, more aware, and soon I became frightened of everything, because everything could hurt or harm me, and also those I loved. I pulled back, but I didn't know how badly I had hurt my parents and my family by doing so. I didn't know. Why do you think they are so hurt? Because they are worried about me and don't know how to help me. Because I don't trust them anymore. I don't trust them not to hurt themselves protecting me if I do something dumb, like I did when Milo died. I'm scared that if I'm in danger, then they will be in danger. It is good to understand these things. But don't forget what you learned from the coin, the sheep, and the young man. They want to help you because they love you. And they will never stop trying to find a way to help you, no matter how much it hurts them. As you learned that you need to trust, so you need to learn to trust their love for you. You need to let them help you be Peter again. Maybe not so reckless as when you were young, but certainly the brave boy that has done so much over the last few days. Even trying to outrun a lion. The shepherd smiled. Can you remember that? Can you remember how much they love you? And can you trust that, as you have learned to trust the hummingbird? Peter smiled and nodded, and then, not even thinking, hugged the shepherd in front of him. You know how to defeat fear? Remember that you are loved by your parents, family, and above all by God. And nothing can ever take you from that love. Nothing. Nothing at all. Not even your fear. Trust in that, and let that love guide you always. They were silent for a little while. Finally, into that silence, Peter whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." "You are most welcome, my brave Peter." Peter spent the rest of that day talking to the shepherd, the young man and his father, and even the grumpy older brother, who really wasn't so bad, and his little guide, the hummingbird. As the day came to a close, the hummingbird turned to Peter. "Would you like to go home?" Peter nodded. It was time. He said his goodbyes. As he parted from the shepherd, the old woman's coin was pressed again into his hand. To remember that all that is lost is never truly lost, not if it is held in love. With that, the great rainbow bridge between worlds opened up, and Peter found himself sliding along, this time diagonally, through the crazy colors and sights. It didn't scare him so badly this time, and he even remembered laughing in pure joy as he traveled. Then, as before, it was done. He was home, standing in front of his front door. He smiled and then threw up in a pot of flowers. "That is still gross," the hummingbird said. Wiping his mouth, Peter turned to him. "Thank you for everything. Thank you." "It was my absolute pleasure," said the hummingbird. "Will I ever see you again?" "I am always with you, Peter. I have always been there, guiding and directing you. I hope, now, you might be able to see me a little more clearly." "I would like that. I will certainly keep my eyes open." "Good. I look forward to our next adventure. Oh, and by the way, for your parents, it has only been about an hour. They haven't even noticed you've left yet." "Oh, okay. Thanks again. And I will see you soon?" Peter left that as a question between them. "Very soon." And with that, the little bird sped off into the night and disappeared. Peter watched him go, long after he could no longer see him. "Goodbye," he whispered. He turned back to his house and rang the doorbell. After a moment, his mother answered. "Peter, what are you doing outside?" But she couldn't finish before Peter seized her in a great hug. "We have a lot to talk about." He looked up at her and smiled. The end. I hope you enjoyed it. It was certainly a pleasure to write.